there, this is Heather Park with the Santa Fe Institute for Mediumship and Spiritual Studies. It's March of 2022, and I'm here with Jim Hyndman today, who is going to be teaching a course for us later on in the spring, summer of this year. And thanks so much for being here with us. We really appreciate it. Jim's coming to us from Paris. I'm here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I appreciate you making the time today. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about your upcoming class. But before we do that, Jim, if you could just tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to mediumship.
Oh, well, I suppose the way I got into mediumship was very much like, I would say about 70% of the people who sort of move into it. I had two bereavements in my life. And it was a case of, I was very fortunate that I was outside a spiritualist church in Glasgow. And a very good friend said, "Oh, I'm going in. Do you want to come in?" And I said, "Oh, no, there's no way you're putting me in there. That's not for me." And I went in and I was surprised. I actually got a message. It was the last message. And it was my second partner who'd just passed away.
Oh,
and
wow.
The information was incredible. So the seed had been sown at that point.
Yes.
And I was living in France, but I would go back and forward to Glasgow, and I'd have a sitting, and they said, "You know, one day you'll be doing this." And I said, "Oh, no, that's not, And then I was very fortunate that I went to, actually went to a demonstration. It was a church service. And I was extremely fortunate to be able to speak to the medium, because it's not always the case. And she said, "I'm doing a beginner's class at the Arthur Findlay College in Stansted, which is just outside London." And I went and I never looked back. It was just, it blew my mind. It gripped me.
Yeah.
And at that point, and I had amazing tutors.
Yeah.
And it just, from there on in, and then I started to read, started to do a lot of exercises through the college. I had a very bad motorbike accident, so I was off work for 2.5 years. So I was very lucky that I could go to the college. Now, the college won't make you into a medium. Right. It will just help you to understand, I understand, okay, I get that. Now I know where that comes in. I understand that, I've had that, and you discuss it with others and you bring it together. And it's very much like a jigsaw puzzle, and you put the little pieces together, and then you start to understand the images or what you're feeling or what you're sensing.
That's so interesting. Now, did you have an inclination throughout your life at any point that you had this ability, or that some of these things were coming to you?
When I was younger, I always had a very strong sixth sense, but I never thought anything of it. But my mother was incredible. If I bring a friend back or whatever for dinner, and she would just say to me, "Be careful, Jim." Or she would just say, "They're a really nice person." There was no malice or anything, but that's all she would say. And she was never wrong. But of course, that was her psychic ability she was using. She had a very strong psychic, a very strong sixth sense on that. But she had the ability, but never believed in it. Although I did take her to a demonstration once, and her father came through. I think that helped her kind of, break the ice. We didn't get very far, but we got somewhere with it.
Yeah, you hear that though, that people within the family have these abilities, or throughout life there are these signals of, "Oh, be careful of this person," or "This has happened." They know when something has happened before anybody else does. So I think it does feel like it's almost carried through a genetic line somehow.
Definitely. Yeah, it came through my mother's side without a doubt, because a lot of my great aunts had a great sort of sixth sense.
Okay,
and one used to kind of do the tea leaves,
yeah. Great.
There was a bit of a joke with that one, but they all loved it. They were all into it. Whereas on my father's side of the family, there was nothing at all.
Oh, interesting.
So, it's being open to it. That's the first thing.
Well, see, I think that's interesting, right? Now, do you feel like most people have some kind of ability, or how do you feel like we kind of come into the world?
Well, I've always seen it as being like baking a cake.
Hmm.
So if you put 100 people in a kitchen and you say to them, bake a cake, everyone will bake the cake.
Yeah.
Some of them will do an extraordinary job,
Right.
and some it won't be so great. But
Right.
we all have the ability, we will all have a mediumistic moment in our life.
Oh,
But
wow.
how many people will actually believe it was a mediumistic moment?
That's interesting, isn't
And
it?
that's the important aspect of it. So that's the sort of end of the cake where it's gone a little bit wrong, you see, because
Yes.
they're not prepared to, or they don't want to take it any further.
Mhm.
And then there are people in the middle who think, oh yeah, I've had that. That's quite interesting, but they don't want to develop it. And then
Sure.
you have people who do want to take it forward and
Mhm.
understand the difference between mediumistic and psychic and
Mhm.
faculties.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I feel like sometimes in America, we maybe don't just make a distinction between psychic and mediumship because they're two very different things. And so that may be something, that's a little bit different. We don't have as many or as long of a history with the spiritualist churches here in the United States. Can you maybe speak to what those two differences are, the mediumistic versus psychic?
Yes, well, they are one and the same.
Hmm.
But basically, well, psychic comes from the Greek word soul.
Hmm.
So basically, it's a soul-to-soul connection where you've got two people, connecting as we are doing now on a
Sure.
soul-to-soul basis. We'll be
Yeah.
working on a psychic. Now, once we leave the body, then we
Hmm.
would the mediumistic. So I'm the one in the middle. There's
I
the
see.
spirit world, and then there is the sitter. So then I'm connecting the two souls together. So how you read that information is more or less, it's the same faculties you use to
Hmm.
read those, but you should be aware, and that's where your professional side comes in, that you're able to say to the person, I sense from you, and then you're saying that, you have an issue in your hip, or that, there's been a problem in your neck or whatever.
Yes.
And your mother is telling me
Hmm.
that. So
Hmm.
you're able to sense where the shift of the energy comes. Generally, there's a pull, you feel it. There's a sort of, well, with me anyway, there's a
Yeah.
pull towards the person. So I know I'm
Yes.
going psychic. And then I go back to the spirit world, that pull drops away, and I'm back with the spirit world again.
Yeah,
So that's really
that's
the
an
difference.
important distinction then, isn't it? Where we're
It is,
getting the information from.
I think it's important because you have to be honest with your sitter.
Mm. Yeah.
Because you can get the same information psychically as you can mediumistic in some cases, not with
Yes.
everything, of course. But it is important in those cases that the sitter knows where you're getting the information from. And it's also teaching people about that difference.
Yes.
And I think that is, that's left out a lot of the time.
Yes.
And for people to understand that, when they come for a sitting, it's not about giving you the lottery numbers or,
Right.
um, you might get the job, you might get a new jobs coming up or a change of house or, there's something happening within the family.
Hmm.
And you may sense that from the person because they already know it. But
Yes.
if they haven't made that decision yet, the spirit world may kick in and say, oh, you are going to move. And that's what the person needs. The spirit world will come through to give the person what they need,
Wow.
not what they want.
Yeah,
You
that's
can
very
demand
different.
from the spirit world, but you won't get it. You can ask from the spirit world, and the chances are you will. But we can't demand. And that's why we don't get the lottery numbers.
Yes. Well, I think that's interesting though, right? And if you've lost a loved one, the information isn't going to be about the lottery, is it? It's hopefully going to be a more heartfelt connection. And I think that's such an important distinction, to make that it's not, and sometimes you maybe are going to hear something that, you may not want to hear because they know they have access. Now, tell me a little bit about once someone crosses over, there's a different access to information. They can see, it feels like our life here on Earth in a much higher, more dimensional kind of way. They see all the facets where sometimes we get very, single vision. Can you talk a little bit to that at how, do they explain that to you, like as they're coming through or as you went through this process of learning how to connect with them, what the difference
More
is?
in the, yes, more in the process of learning,
Yeah.
the college and how the tutors have experienced things. And then, of course, sometimes I've been very privileged to sit in an excellent trance demonstration where the spirit world comes through and talks, and that is incredible. And that's where you'll get a lot of information as well. But yes, they do. They say, from what I've experienced, I can only talk from my experience, is that they know up to sort of like 30 years ahead.
Wow.
So there's this idea of like, the droplets of God. Mavis Patilla, one of my tutors, she uses that expression. And she said, the droplets come when the time is right. So when the time is right, the teacher will come. Yeah. So when we need to learn something, be it for a cure, one day for cancer, or as we've been going through the pandemic, so these, you've got scientists working away, trying to work out how to put together a vaccine. But in the background, there's the spirit world. And if they're open to it, there might be, my sister works in that field and she is very open to it. And she'll say, I'm going to try this. And they're like, oh, don't be silly. But she just gets that feeling, let's try it. Let's see if it works.
Yes.
And that's where they can really influence if we're open.
Wow.
And it was quite extraordinary. And you will, you might be just walking outside and you suddenly, you think of the person because you've seen a rose or whatever. But that thought is a connection.
Sure.
Because it's energy. And that's what they're looking for as well, that you can just link to them through that thought.
Wow. Yeah, it's very powerful, to pay attention. We have to pay attention though. There's a process. So along those lines, let me just ask you a little bit. You have a class coming up called Walking the Path of Spirit. So now tell us a little bit about how you approach teaching. It sounds like there's a lot to learn, but it's a very internal process. So a lot of this must be about how we can kind of filter some of the information that comes through and how we probably have to get clear. It's going to be different maybe for every person, but there have to be some foundations for this. So how do you create those foundations in your course?
Well, first of all, I would say to people, please make sure you're on time, the discipline, sitting down. And I start with making sure that they understand what is sitting in the power.
Yes.
Sitting in the power is slightly different to meditation. It's like a form of guided meditation, if you like, but it's teaching you to sort of expand your aura, to be able to push yourself out, because the idea is that you expand and the spirit world is on a different vibration, but you're coming up to them because they can't really come down to you. So you have to be able to learn to do that. And sitting in the power is very much about that and giving you that discipline to sit and constantly allow your mind to shut off, because we love to just sit, don't we? And the mind
don't we?
So that's one part of it. Then you've got, within a course, you might do the different clairs, like clairsentience, clairalience, which is, where you smell, clairgustance, where you taste. So you might actually taste cigarette, or you might smell cigarette. So there are things like that you can work on as well with students that have a bit more of an understanding. When you're starting with beginners, you're obviously going to be working with just the actual kind of sensing, do you have a man or a woman, and how that's going to, and trying to avoid there used to be a system of, is it a man, which side of the family, there used to be this list, but they've kind of moved away from that. And it's more of just allowing the spirit world to come through and actually talk, because we can't control it, and it's learning, and that's where you have to let go.
I see.
As the medium, you have to let go, and that's very difficult at the beginning because we want to know the story.
Yeah.
When you're giving a sitting or you're doing a demonstration, you don't know what's coming next.
Okay.
And that is where you have to learn to trust. And that trust you build up over the years and years and years. And also learning about the different techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of, I use PowerPoint quite a lot to help illustrate some of the different aspects.
Okay.
And then you can also look at philosophy as well. That's a
Mm-hmm.
different area. You know, I mentioned trance earlier on. That's another area, which is, and they always say trance can only enhance. And that's true, because you get into that sort of altered state and it helps you to really build that relationship with the spirit world. Learning who your guides are, but learning who your guides are in your own time, not sitting down and saying, oh, I've got an Indian chief and I've got and none. That's not the important part. The important part is to find out who they are, working with them.
So now sitting in the power, that's a process. Is that done daily? How do you do that?
I used to do it
Personally?
daily. Yeah. I used to sit down. I'll be honest with you. I used to fall asleep. I think because I was so tense, you know, and at the beginning I would kind of go into my own little world, but eventually I was able to stay with it from the beginning to the end and learn to expand. You know, because obviously when you're falling asleep, you're going in the wrong direction. You're speaking out the way. But it was, I found that really, really helpful. And particularly when I was about to do a demonstration where I could just sit down and focus on that and without thinking, oh Lord, you know, because it's a nervous moment when you have to stand up in front of 100 people and you don't know what you're going to say. And you think, oh, is there anyone there? Is anyone going to be there? So the sitting in the power is a great way of just keeping you relaxed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like, Jim, you do a couple of different things. So we're talking about platform demonstration. We're talking about personal readings. You've mentioned being a part of trance, like within a circle. So can you speak just a little bit about what it is that you do and kind of what platform, maybe for some of our viewers that might not know exactly what demonstration is, how that works?
So basically, I would start with probably sittings. It's easier because if you're in a classroom environment, it's much easier to put people into groups of 2 or groups of 3.
Okay.
And it would be a case of where you would sit them down and say, right, okay, let's see if you can get this type of information, you know. Are you able to see a place, or are you able to see, when you're doing exercises, it's a bit more structured than it would be if it was a normal sitting, because you're trying to stretch. You know, it's like dough. You're constantly stretching and stretching and stretching. So it's all about working with the students and trying to help them to get to where they need to be.
Okay.
And you start off, you know, once you've got a class, usually I start off at the beginning and I'll look at the class and I'll assess what they actually need.
Okay.
And then we'll look at what sort of, you know, small groups we're going to put them into and how we're going to develop their mediumship through exercises. And that would be very much like a sitting. That's a one-to-one. Then you've got the demonstration, which is where you would actually stand up at the front and you would have 10, 20, 30, whatever. And you don't know who you're going to go to. You don't know what you're going to say, a bit like a sitting. But you've got an audience there. And that's a demonstration. I think you call that a gallery, is it? I think it's known as a gallery sometimes.
Okay.
But
I haven't heard that, but
you know, and that is a very good way of teaching many people about mediumship. Like, not everyone will be given a message in those cases, but it should be touched in some way.
Yeah.
Or it should sort of, you know, create that sort of thought process of, wow, this is interesting. How does this work? So that's, sorry, that's the sort of areas I work with.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious. You know, I have been able to sit in demonstrations before, and Sometimes personalities come through and they're like uh, a little bit shocking. I think we sometimes maybe make the wrong assumption that once someone crosses over, they might become more docile or calm or something. But many times the personality of that person has to come through so that the sitter recognizes who that person is. Have you had instances that people come through and are just kind of these larger than life personalities, and you have to kind of deal with some interesting things?
Um, they usually come back. They may not be like that now.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Interesting.
Sometimes a lot of the time they come back to ask for forgiveness, to say
Oh,
that they're
wow.
sorry, or their situations, because they're trying to repair,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
that helps them move on, but at the same time helps the sitter.
Yeah.
Um, I can give you an example where I was in Adelaide, actually, in Australia, and I
Hmm.
have a cousin that lives there, but I didn't know where he lived. So, of course, I went onto the phone book and I thought, right, okay, I found him. So I was doing different classes at the church, and I was doing a service and then it was the Friday evening, there was a demonstration, and I got up and I started giving information about mother. I knew she was from abroad, but I was looking for the person in the room that worked in the hospital. So I
Hmm.
knew that was important. So no one spoke up at the beginning, but I kept going. And then eventually this lady in a very, very strong Glaswegian accent said to me, I can understand what you've said. So
Oh.
we continued,
Hmm.
and at the end of it, she came down and she said to me, Jim, can I have a word? I said, yes, of course. I said, what can I do for you? And she said, I believe I'm your cousin's wife. And I said, I was going to surprise you. And she said, well, just as well you didn't go to that address. She said, because that's not where we live.
Oh my
So isn't it
gosh.
wonderful how the spirit world kind of brings everything together? And,
Hmm.
every time you do a sitting or every time you do a demonstration, you learn something new.
Yeah.
And within that as well, there was, and I thought, because there were moments in that particular demonstration, if I look back now, I was questioning whether the person in the spirit world was actually in the hospital, or was I looking for the person in the room that was in the hospital?
Yes.
And I had only a split second to make the decision.
Yes.
And that's about learning. You learn to feel the energy and which way
Hmm.
you're going. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can blow the whole message, well, not the whole thing apart, because you've just made that one mistake.
Yes.
And of course, it's taking people back. And that's the great thing about when you're in a classroom, taking people back and getting them to work through it.
Yes, that sounds very subtle. That sounds very subtle, that you have to know your own you have to know your own awareness to understand the difference of some of those very subtle instances, it seems like.
There is, it'll all, the more you work with the spirit world, the more and more subtle it becomes,
Mm,
because it's a language. So at
it's
the
a
beginning,
language.
yeah, it's very solid and then afterwards, you might see a ship, and then you'll see the beach, and you think, right, okay, now I've got to put those two together, and what am I feeling to be able to work out, did the ship sink,
Yes.
or is this a cruise that I'm on, or
Yes.
you're working with it constantly, and that's how it works for me. But it
Hmm.
might not necessarily be like that for someone else.
I
So
see.
it's also important to take that into consideration.
Hmm. What's interesting is, it sounds to me, and I think this is true for many people doing this, this is a lifelong education. This is not something you go into and just boom, immediately you have all the information, you know everything, and it started when you were 5. It's not clear cut like that at all, is it?
No, you will start off at the beginning, and you'll have a lot of doubts. And
Mm.
um, if you ever read Eileen Garrett, she had many hissy fits, and she is an amazing medium. But every time she had a hissy fit, she was moving forward.
Yeah.
So I always sort of hold on to her, because you will have those moments where you think, I'm not going to go on with this. because
Yeah.
it's one of the hardest paths to go down.
Yeah.
And it's quite a lonely path as well.
Mm.
It's a very fulfilling path,
Yeah.
because as you go, as I use the title, as you're walking through that pathway with spirit, but it's not a straight path.
Mm.
It weaves, and every time you turn the corner, there's something new. And you're
Mm-hmm.
constantly learning. You never go back. You may
Yeah.
feel as if you're going back, but you will never go back. If you do it for 5 years and then you stop, where you've left it is where you will start on, and you will take off again.
Interesting.
The hardest bit with it is that sometimes you may have a mother, for example, who obviously has to look after her kids, might be working, doesn't have the time to be able to go into classes every week.
Sure.
And then you may have someone else who, takes classes every single week.
Right.
But when they do eventually get the chance to be perhaps in the same class,
Mm-hmm.
it's the mother that takes off quicker
Oh,
than the
interesting.
person who's been doing it for years and years and years.
That's so
And
curious.
there's no rhyme and reason for that. It's just how it is, and that can be unsettling for a lot of people as well, But
Yeah.
it's important to accept that you are where you are within your path. There is no race.
Right.
That's it's like the tortoise and the hare.
Yes.
You're better to be the tortoise, because you learn more.
Yeah.
And you take it on board, and you will get there in the end.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, one other thing I wanted to ask about, you mentioned having a relationship with your guides, and along this line also of having this experience kind of throughout a lifetime. It's one thing to maybe be able to sit with someone and help them with a loved one or loved ones, but it's another thing for yourself to have a relationship with the guides in your life. So that seems like it's a similar practice, or it can be combined, but that relation also sounds like it supports each individual and how they move throughout their life. Would you agree with that?
It is important to know who your guide is, because when you've done the sitting, I mean, you at the beginning it's important just to work with it and allow it to unfold when it's time for it to unfold. But when you get to know them, then you can sit and say, they know that you've had a problem with a particular sitting or a particular demonstration, but you're just putting it through in your head and saying, look, I really struggled with that. I'm aware of that. And you can sit with them. You might not get the answer immediately. You might have to wait 3 months. You might have to wait a year. But the fact that you're working with them and you're aware of them, they will do their bit. Again, it's like the droplets of God.
Yes.
They will come through when they can, and they will help you with it. And they'll change it in such a way so that you understand it the next time you get it. So it's developing that link. How can I describe it? I suppose it's when you're about to go on and do a big demonstration where you've got maybe 200 people. The fact that you can sit down and just sense your guide as well, then you're not on your own.
Right.
When I talked earlier on about sitting in the power, that's probably at the beginning you would do that if you didn't really know who your guide was. But I know when I sit, perhaps only for 5 minutes or so, I just need to feel my guide, because I still get nervous. We all get nervous. There's very few mediums that would admit that they don't get nervous before they go on a platform. But it's very much like an actor. It's a very positive thing, because it stimulates you and gets you moving and gets you working.
Wow, that's so lovely. There was one thing I'm just going to look at my notes here real quick, because there was something beautiful that you wrote about this class that you're going to be teaching. And it says that the soul should unfold at its own pace. And I think that's such an important key. This is not a weekend warrior class that you're going to be teaching. This is not about coming out being a medium. This is about understanding the process and letting that unfold, can you just speak a little bit to maybe what your students should feel like they've achieved after your course? What's the main goal for them to really take in?
Well, depending on where they are within their, their path,
Right.
it's about teaching them to be with themselves, to start to learn who they are, and being able to see that. I see it very much like a gas burner. There's a little bit of a gas flame there, and then it should start to open up.
Yeah.
And that may happen very, very quickly, or it may happen very slowly, just as I said about the mother and the other person. So, but what is important is that they start to have a confidence. Yeah. Once you build that confidence within yourself, and you say, right, okay, I do understand. This is not just my imagination. Yes. The spirit world will work through your imagination, and that's why you'll believe it is your imagination, but you have to be able to separate it. And it's all these fine lines. So depending on where they are, it may be just about them being able to understand that fine line, yes. Or it might be that if they're further down the line, that they're able to put images together, and that they can start to understand, oh, that plus that means for me, each person would be different. And it's about teaching them to have that discipline from the beginning, when they come in and they sit down and they're quiet, and then they start working straight away, very much about timekeeping and trying to, because it's instilling that discipline within you, especially in a classroom, because when we're on our own, we all do it. We say, it's like when you're supposed to go to the physiotherapist and they say you're doing the exercises at home, and you say, oh yes, and we know very well that that's not always happening. Sure. But you've got the key, you've got the tools there to be able to do it if you want to do it, and that's important as well. So it's about giving people tools to work with, which they can then take away and use if they so wish. And constantly building on that, and taking away some of the myths, and some of the thoughts of, why are we doing a sitting in the first place? Yes. It's not just about giving someone a message. Yes. Yeah. So that is an important aspect of it. And what is the purpose of the message? Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Jim, I just have to say thank you so much, excuse me, for being with us this morning. We're really looking forward to the online class, but I have to admit that it's going to be really fun when we can get you here in Santa Fe or somewhere here in the Southwest in person, because I know that the classes really take off in a slightly different way when we can be in person. And we are planning on doing that. We are planning on getting you out here at some point, hopefully in maybe the end of 2022 or even 2023. So we so look forward to your class coming up. And let me just let our viewers know that they can go online to find us. We're the Santa Fe Institute for Mediumship and Spiritual Studies. And that's just SFIMSS.com. And you'll be able to find Jim and other courses on there. But we still look forward to your weekend courses coming up this late spring and early summer. And just thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to meet you. I got to meet you finally. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much.